and welcome to my video, 6 best colours for a beginner. In this video I'm going to focus on guiding you through the minefield of selecting what colours to purchase. This video is perfect for you if you are a complete beginner to painting. Firstly, I'd like you to ask yourself these questions and be honest. Are you not sure what colours kind of go well together? Are you feeling stuck or overwhelmed by the amount of choice that's available to you? Perhaps you don't know where to start, or are you someone who doesn't want to waste money on buying colours that you're not going to use? These are all questions that my students regularly ask me, and I'll answer all of these in this video. As a bonus, I've also included the best way to set up your palette and workspace effectively. Plus, I will give you some basic tips on colour mixing to get you started. Okay, so in this part I'm going to show you the 6 best colours for a watercolour beginner. So, I am going to show you my favourite 6 colours and the colours that I've been using to teach with now for some years. I always recommend these colours to my students, and you can mix a lot of colours from these primaries. So the first colour I'm applying is cadmium yellow. It's a really rich yellow, a sort of a yolky yellow, and it's great for producing all kinds of different mixes. The second colour is lemon yellow. And you'll see that this is actually quite different to the cadmium yellow. There's significantly different, and I'll explain that as we go through this tutorial. So that's also a beautiful yellow, really, really bright and vivid. The next colour is cadmium red. This is another gorgeous colour. You can get some really rich mixes from this. You'll notice that I'm really cleaning my brush well in between each new application. So the next one I want to show you is called alizarin crimson. Again, totally different from the first red, and it will give you lots of different mixes. Okay, so the 5th colour is French ultramarine blue. Just mix some water in with that. I just love all these colours. I use them all the time in my paintings. Look how gorgeous that is. Wash my brush off again. Clean water. And the final colour, colour number 6, is cerulean blue. So this is very, very different to this other blue I have. So cerulean blue is an opaque colour. It's absolutely beautiful. You can make some really, really nice greens from that blue. Okay, so that cerulean blue I mentioned is an opaque colour. The other colour I have in my 6 that's opaque is the cadmium yellow. All the other colours are transparent. So with these 6 colours we can mix a multitude of other colours from them, mixing them together, and which I will go into a little bit later on. But I don't know if you have noticed that they are very, very different. This column on the left hand side here, these are all warm colours, and the colours on the right, they are all cool colours. So this is quite significant. So when we are looking at creating a painting, it's really quite important, I suppose, to know whether you want to create an overall look that is cool or one that is warm. And knowing these basics will really help in the long run. So what I want to do now you've got those 6 colours, I want to show you the kinds of paintings that I create using those palettes. So first of all, I have these 2 paintings. So we have a warm painting and a cool painting. So the cat is much warmer in colour. We've got these beautiful kind of oranges, ginger colours going on, lovely neutral kind of warm tone in the sofa that the cat's sitting on there, and again a beautiful neutral kind of but warm tone in the background too. Now with the great tits that I've painted on this side, these are very cool, and you can see in the shadows they're even quite cool. You've got the blue tones and the green tones in the shadows there. But by limiting my palette to either warm or cool, I've been able to create a uniformity across the painting, and it gives the overall feel of harmony, and it helps your paintings to work really well for you. I found that my more successful paintings are the paintings where I've really limited my palette right down to the 3 primaries, whether they're warm or cool. So those are the first 2 paintings I wanted to show you. The second 2 paintings I'll bring in now. So we have a sort of a forest landscape scene, and we have this water lily. Now you can probably tell straight away, this is the warm painting, this is the cool painting. So although this painting on my right is cool, although it has red colours in it, those reds are very cool. They have blue tones in them. And so I've created these reds and pinks using the crimson colour from my palette. So you've got those blue undertones, keeping it quite cool. You'll also notice that the shadows are also cool, so quite blue in colour. Whereas if we look at the left-hand painting, everything is very warm. We've got lots of beautiful oranges, some lovely cadmium yellow colours going through that as well. I've even added a little bit of acrylic gold paint in some of those leaves, if you can see that on the surface, which creates a nice little bit of texture to my painting. But we've got a dark brown stag here, and although he's a dark brown colour, he still has warmth. That brown has warm tones within it. So we've got that overall balance again. So we've got the balance and the harmony of the warm colour palette, but we also have contrast. We have some pale colours and darker colours. It helps to give the painting that feeling of depth. And the final 2 paintings that I want to show you, they are both floral paintings. So it's nice to be able to compare 2 similar kind of subject matter. Again, I have my warm painting on the left, my cool painting on the right. So it's very obvious from the outset that the background plays quite an important role in these 2 paintings. So we've got this beautiful cool blue green colour on the right hand side here, and these lovely cool pinks throughout these flowers, and the overall look is harmonious, it's balanced, it works very well. On the left we have a warm watercolour painting of cherry blossom, and rather than using the crimson to create these pinks and reds, I've actually used the cadmium red instead, so it's much more warm in colour. There are some touches of crimson in there just to get some really deep pink going on, but overall the feeling is warm, and we have that pink kind of undertones coming through the dark brown branches as well. So overall that lovely warm feeling, these beautiful warm leaves, created by the cadmium yellow and a little bit of that ultramarine, French ultramarine in there as well, but predominantly the cadmium yellow. So it's a very, very warm painting overall. So I hope that gives you some idea as to how you can create a painting just by using 3 warm primary colours and 3 cool primary colours. And actually the range and variety of colours you can create with those 3 are actually, you know, it's limitless, to be honest. Okay, so that's great. So coming back to the 6 colours then, just to recap, we have our 2 yellows. We've got the cadmium yellow and the lemon yellow. We have cadmium red and alizarin crimson. And our 2 blues, we've got French ultramarine blue and cerulean blue. So now I'm going to show you how you can set up your watercolour palette. So if, like me, you use the tube paints, I like to decant them into a palette so that they're always out ready to go. Sometimes it can be a little bit fiddly putting the lids, unscrewing the lids and putting them back on. So I just find this is a really nice way of using those tubes of paint. So what I have here is a palette that can close up, so it keeps your paints nice and clean, it stops them from getting dusty. It has some nice large areas that you can mix your colours into, so that's great, but it also has these smaller wells where you can decant the paint into. So my focus today really is on this side of my palette, which shows the primary colours that I use on a regular basis. So as I showed you earlier, and I have 2 yellows, 2 reds and 2 blues. What I have done in this palette in particular is I've kept my 3 warm primaries together and my 3 cool primaries together. So actually in the previous palette that I've been using, I grouped together my yellows, my reds and my blues. So there's different ways you can go about it, but I just thought with this smaller palette it would be nice to keep the warms and the cools kind of together in their groupings. It may well help you as a beginner to do that. It will remind you that your warms are on the left, your cools are on the right. So that way you don't have to keep referring to sort of your sample sheets and things like this. Hopefully it'll make it a little bit easier for you guys to remember where those colours are on your palette. So as you can see, I also have this second section here with several other colours in them, but I'm not going to go over those today with you. If I bring back this palette here, so your other option is to have a nice big palette like this one. I've used this one for years and it served me very well, especially having these really large, quite deep wells. So if you're doing a larger painting and you need to mix up lots of colours of wash for backgrounds and things like that, this is really handy for that. The only trouble is, as you can see, there isn't a lid, so the paints are open to the elements, if you like, and I found that it started to get quite dusty and dirty. But what I do is I just get a plastic sheet and I use some blue tack in the corners, the top 2 corners there, and when I've used it and I want to put it away, I simply just stick that sheet over the top and it protects my palette. So it's a good way of doing it if you have one of those already. The other thing I wanted to show you is, I mean, you might possibly have a solid palette in a tin like this. So these are really popular as well. I've got several of these, and this particular one is a Dala and Rowney, and it opens up into a beautiful palette with your sort of samples there. But as you can see, it's been well used, and you have these sections to mix on the one side and these larger wells on the other side. These are great too, especially the fact that you can clip each paint in and out. You can add in different colours, can build up your own palette as you go. So they're fantastic as well. As you can see, I tend not to clean my palette in between uses. I like to use up my paint rather than wasting it. So I might well come back and do a warm-up piece just using some of these paints that I've already mixed on that palette there. So you might have one of these, which is fantastic. And I also wanted to show you these little sample cards. So this is basically a piece of watercolour paper that I've cut up from an old painting that didn't quite work out. And I've done tester strips of each of my colours on this side. And it just means that if I have to refer to it at some stage, then it's there for me. I know exactly where each colour is in my palette and what that colour looks like. And similarly, I've done the same thing on the other side too. So I've got my Payne's grey, sap green for example. So I know exactly what colour is where, and also what it looks like and how it acts with the watercolour paper. So this is a great way to get started so that you become more familiar with your particular palette. I really would recommend doing these tester strips, and then you can keep that inside your palette if you want to, or have it handy. It's a really easy thing to do. Also, you probably want to obviously list the colour. As you can see, I've done that on here. You can see that's cadmium yellow, cadmium red, French ultramarine blue. So I've listed those names on there on both sides, just as reference for me. Now, what I want to show you next is how to kind of set up your workspace. So this is a really common question I get asked by my students all the time. And there is a really great way of setting up just to make things a lot easier for you as beginners. So firstly, if I set that aside, you are going to want some form of board to work on. So I have a drawing board here. It has a clip on the one side so that I can slide paper underneath that, but in actual fact I don't use the clip. I mainly just place my watercolour sheet down and tape it to the board. By taping the paper down, it means that it helps to prevent this cockling effect happening when I apply a lot of water and paint to the surface of the paper. So it also means I'm able to manipulate the paper. If I want to do any tilting, dripping and moving that paint around on the surface, I can easily pick up that board and tilt it very easily. So I have my board, and that's sort of central to me on my workspace. Next, you're going to want 2 pots of water. A larger pot, I just use old glass jars, sort of jam jars or anything like that. So I have a larger pot of water for cleaning my brushes, and it's important to have a second pot as well, filled with water that is clean and it remains clean, and that is what you use to mix your colours with so that you prevent your colours from getting muddy. So it's really important to have 2 jars of water. So they go on the right hand side at the top, out of the way. That's because I'm right-handed. If you're a left-handed person, then you want to reverse everything I'm telling you here and have your jars on the left-hand side of your drawing board. So next is the watercolour palette. So I have mine here. That also goes on the right-hand side. This makes it really, really easy for me to access my paint as I'm painting, and it's on the same side as my water, so I don't have to move very far when I'm cleaning my brush or I'm adding water to my palette. The next item, obviously you're going to use probably several brushes for your paintings, but I always place them on the right hand side so they're easy for me to access during my painting. Okay, so the other thing you're going to need is some kitchen paper or some paper towels, or maybe even an old cloth, something that you can clean your brushes on while you're working. So I tend to tear off a couple of sheets of paper, and I tend to fold them, double them up, fold them in half like this, and then I have that at the bottom of my palette here so that I can clean my brush in the water, and then I can dab it on the paper towel just there. And that's all on the right hand side. As I'm right-handed, you would, like I said earlier, reverse it and have everything on the left if you're a left-handed person. The reason that I do this is because if you could imagine me doing it the other way round, if I had my paint on the left, sorry, and water's on the right, and everything else, I would go from my water jar to my mixing palette, come back over here, and I could easily drip paint or knock the jars as I'm painting, and it just becomes a lot harder for me to work that way. It also means I'm leaning across my work a lot. You could easily sort of smudge your painting that way too. So yeah, I always set up my workstation in this way. Everything's to hand, and it will make it a lot easier for you guys if you do a similar thing too. So I hope that really helps. So we've looked at setting up your palette. We've looked at the 6 best colours that I recommend for a beginner like yourselves to use. We know whereabouts to put them in our palette. We've looked at a few different palette options, and we've set up our workstation ready to go. So next I want to show you how to think about colour mixing. So when you start to think about colour mixing, the best way to begin is to create your own colour wheel. So you might think this is quite childlike, you perhaps did it at school, but believe me, this is a great way of getting started, especially when it comes to watercolours. So as you can see here, I've already created one colour wheel in my sketchbook. So this is using the warm primary colours, and I've simply created a 6-sectioned circle and placed in the primaries and the secondaries that they create. So I've added the cadmium yellow in here, then added a little bit of the cadmium red, which is next to it, to create my orange. The purple is created by mixing some of the red with the blue to create that beautiful purple, and then the green is created by mixing some blue and yellow. So that gives you the 3 primaries and the 3 secondary colours that they create together. That is the warm colour palette. So what I'm going to do next is actually demonstrate to you how to create the cool colour palette. So I have just a number 6 round brush. It's got a nice point to it, so I'll be able to get into the corners and things like that. Remember, we have 2 jars of water, 1 jar for washing off the brush, 1 jar that's kept clean for adding to the pigments to mix our colours. So as I did before, we'll start off with the yellow. So I'm just wetting my brush, and I'm just going to add, now remember we're doing the cool colour wheel here, so I'm going to pick up some of the lemon yellow off the palette and pop it down here. I'm going to add some of the clean water into that yellow and immediately fill this yellow section of the colour wheel. So you can take as much time as you like just filling this out. Now there's several things you can do here. There's different ways of going about it. You could do all 3 primaries to begin with, so I could finish with my yellow and then start on my red and fill out the blue. Alternatively, I like to do it by starting off with one colour, so this time it's yellow. Next along on my colour wheel is orange, so I've already got yellow on my palette. I'm going to clean off my brush and I'm going to pick up a little bit of red and add it to that orange, the yellow that's already on my palette. Oh, I've just realised, excuse me guys, I've just gone into the wrong red. Okay, so that's because I'm talking and obviously trying to paint at the same time. So let me concentrate. So let's pick up some more of the lemon yellow. So it's very easily done. Going into the wrong colour there. So I have yellow on my palette. I'm cleaning that off in the large jar of water. And then I'm going to go into my cool red, which is the crimson, picking some of that up, adding it into that yellow, and it creates an orange colour. Okay, so now I'm going to fill in the orange section on my colour wheel. I could make this a little stronger, so just clean off my brush, use the paper towel there to dry my brush. I want some clean water. I'm going to go back into the lemon yellow, pick some more up. I just want to strengthen this a little bit. So I'm going to take off that yellow, clean off my brush, pick up some more clean water and pick up a bit more of that crimson. Here we go. So we now have a bit of a stronger colour than I had before. So this is better. And I'm just going to apply that orange colour onto my colour wheel. Okay, so it's a little bit stronger. So what I did was I added more pigment, more of the paint to my mix, which gives me a stronger colour. Okay, so that's the orange. Now the next colour along, of course, is red. So I don't want to go to my crimson and add it to this orange. It's red on its own, it's a primary colour, so I want to start from scratch. So clean water into the crimson. Some of that crimson on the palette. There we go. And then fill in that next section of the colour wheel. Doing an exercise like this is not only helping with understanding how to mix these colours and sort of what proportion of each colour will change the mix, it gives you an opportunity to have a go at brush control as well. So, you know, you can use the point of your brush to get into those corners and edges of the shape and control that paint. So if I did this on a smaller scale, then obviously it would be a lot trickier to get into those corners. It's just another one of those things that you're picking up as you go along, really. Another tip for you guys would be to turn your sketchbook around, and that will make it easier as well. So if I came to paint the blue next, for example, I might want to turn it this way just to make it easier for me. So the next colour that I need to fill in is purple. I already have red on my palette. It's clean, there's nothing else mixed with this crimson at all, so I know I can use that to create my purple. And I need to remember I have clean water on my brush. I need to remember to go into my cool blue, which is the cerulean blue, pick up some of that cerulean blue and mix it with the crimson there. And you get this lovely purple colour. Really, really pretty. So I'm just going to spin my book around a little bit to make it easier for me. And just fill in that shape, go back, pick up some more paint. Because I'm using quite a small brush, this is only a number 6, it doesn't hold an awful lot of paint. So you need to kind of go back and pick up more as you go along. If I was using a number 10, which I often do, then I probably would be able to fill out that shape without reapplying any more paint because it holds such a lot more in those bristles. So that's something else that you'll get used to. So obviously you can cover a much larger area with a larger brush, much quicker. Okay, so that's the purple. So cleaning my brush again. The next colour on my colour wheel is blue. Again, it's a primary, it's in our palette. I want it nice and clean, so I'm going to go into the clean water, straight into that blue. I'm going to pull it out onto my palette because I know that my next colour is green, so I'm going to use some of this cerulean to create that green. So I'm going to get a decent amount on my palette there, and then just fill out that space nicely. So remember, the cerulean is an opaque colour, which can be beneficial in some respects when it comes to painting. It will cover other colours easier than a transparent paint will. So if you're working on layering, then it's a good thing to know whether your paint is actually transparent or whether it's opaque. So I'm cleaning off that blue, drying off my excess water, getting rid of that excess water on there. I'm going to pick up a little bit of clean water, and so now I'm creating a green, and we can see that it's in between a yellow and a blue. So we know we need to add some yellow into that cerulean blue to create our green. And it really does, these cool colours create some lovely fresh green colours. And then just simply apply it to your colour wheel. I'm just going to add a little bit more water so that I've got enough paint to fill the shape. There we go. And that's the second colour wheel created. So this one we can label as cool. And if you want to, just as a reminder, you can add the colours in there. So this one was alizarin crimson, is the cool red. The blue is cerulean blue. And the yellow is lemon yellow, so we can add that there. And obviously the orange, the green and the purple in this case are secondary colours mixed from those primaries. So if we go back, we now have a warm colour palette and a cool colour palette. They are both very, very different. So we get some lovely purples with the cool colours. If you look back to the warm colour palette, the purple is actually very muddy and quite brown actually in colour. And that's because the warm red kind of has a little bit of yellow in it, which turns it much more orangey. And of course that way we've got red, yellow and blue, and we all know that those three primaries make a brown. So therefore the purples created by this colour palette tend to be a little bit brown in colour. The red in the cool palette is crimson. That has touches of blue in it. So we know that this will create a lovely purple colour. I think that both colour palettes create really nice greens, really sort of natural tones using the warm colours, and beautiful bright crisp tones in the cool colours. Then the orange, the warm colour palette creates a really nice kind of traditional orange that you're all kind of aware of, that you see. And then the cool, it's not too different. It's because it has the red, the crimson, which I said a second ago, it has a little bit of blue in there. So therefore you've got the red with a bit of blue in it and yellow, which turns it a little bit brown. So therefore the orange that the cool colour palette gives us is a little bit more muddy. So just by creating your secondary colours from these 6 primaries, you can see which colours are going to give you the better secondary colours that you're after. So if you're creating a painting, for example, that is floral and bright and crisp, then you may well want to be looking at the cool colour palette. If you're creating a landscape that's kind of quite moody and has a lot of natural tones, then a warm colour palette might be more suitable. So hopefully that's given you a taster into the first steps of mixing colours. Now I will be creating an in-depth tutorial about colour mixing, which you might well be interested in the future, so keep your eyes open for that. I will let you know, I'll get in contact with you and I'll let you know once that goes live. But this just gives you a basic understanding of using 2 colours to create a 3rd colour. So I want to give you a few extra tips when it comes to colour mixing. I've shown you the basics here with the 2 colour wheels, the cool and the warm colour wheels. But what would happen if you mixed a cool red with a warm yellow, for example? You might want to actually do that on a separate sheet. You could create a whole new set of colour wheels. You might want to mix the warm blue with the alizarin crimson, the cool red, and see what kind of purple that creates, because it will create a different purple to the 2 that you've already made. And that way you can work out which colours work best for you, and also which colours you prefer out of those primaries that you've chosen. So another thing I want to show you now, this is an exercise that is really useful for any beginner to painting. There's a few things, a few basics, a few kind of foundational tips that you need to be aware of. For example, the amount of water that you use when mixing can be quite significant. So for example, let's take some of the warm blue, which is the ultramarine, the French ultramarine. Okay, so this French ultramarine I will paint here. So that is quite a thick mix. It's very concentrated. It creates a vivid, rich blue colour. But what happens if I add more water to that mix? So if I add a touch of water over here, it creates a different blue. It creates a paler blue. There's much more water in that than pigment. And we could go paler still. So if I just add water to my brush, there's still a little bit of pigment on my brush, and that mixes with the water and it creates a paler blue. So we've got 3 different blues there. And that will work the same with any of the colours on your palette. So let's take let's take the crimson, because that's a lovely strong colour too. Mix some crimson. So here the crimson is very, very thick. It's a very thick consistency, creamy consistency. And it's a lovely, vivid, dark, deep, kind of moody red. Add a little bit of water. It thins it a little bit, but it's such a strong colour that still creates a rich tone. So let's add a bit more water. So it's starting to get lighter. Let's dab off some of that paint, clean off my brush. And let's go into clean water and just take a tiny little dab of that red on my palette, and we start getting much more pink tones. Add a little bit more water and it will go paler still. So you need to be aware of that. So if you want to create a vivid, deep colour, then you want more paint in your mix than water. If you want a really fluid, pale, transparent wash, then you want to add a lot more water to that mix. And kind of the percentages of things are important when you think about painting, because what I could do is I could use this blue here, which I know is it's a little bit thinner now because I did add some water to it, so I'm just going to add some more pigment to that. Okay, so that's a little bit thicker now. Let's just wash that off my brush, and let's add a little bit of this crimson. So take a little bit, mix it in. Okay, so I've added a little bit of the crimson, and it creates a lovely dark purple. If I wash my brush again and wipe off the excess, add a little bit more of that crimson into that mix, and it will give me a slightly more red purple colour. If I do the same again, clean off my brush, add all of that crimson into that purple, and I get an even more red purple colour. Okay, so although I'm only using two colours, I'm able to create lots of different shades of that colour, different tones. Okay, so let's do that again with a different colour. Let's start off with the cerulean blue. So I've got the cerulean blue, it's nice and thick. There. Okay. Clean my brush. Clean water. And let's go into the warm yellow. So let's add some cadmium yellow to that. So if I just mix up some yellow, put it on my palette here. Okay. And wipe off some of that excess. I've now only got a little bit of yellow on my brush. If I mix it into that blue, okay, it gives us a nice green. And it's quite opaque because what I've done there is I've mixed my two opaque colours that I have in my palette. But what happens if I add more yellow? I get a lighter green, I get a much more yellow green, and I can keep going until I get a very yellow green colour. So the more yellow I add, the more yellow my green becomes. The more blue you add, the darker and more blue your green would become. And that would be the same if I was using yellow and the red. So my oranges would become much more red and darker if I added more of the red colour. If I started to add much more of the yellow colour, then the yellow would overpower it and it would become a much more yellow orange. So there's lots of different things you can do while practicing your mixing, bringing those colours together and seeing how many different colours you can create and how pale you can get them as well. So if I just dry my brush, clean water into, let's mix all that together. Let's add some more water and I can create a beautiful pale green with that. That's lovely. So you can create some really subtle colours too by adding by adding much more water to your mix. So you've got to think about which colours work well together. The colours that I've shown you today, those 6 primaries, they all work well together. They all create interesting colours, and you may well want to create a uniformed, balanced painting that has harmony by just choosing your cool primaries or just choosing your warm primaries to create paintings that have a limited palette. But yes, I do try all these different things, all these mixing tips that I've given you. Have a real go at those and get to grips with these basic colour mixing techniques, and you'll gain a lot more confidence in your ability, and you'll find that you'll become much more successful in your paintings. As a complete beginner, it's easy to be overwhelmed by all the things you think you have to learn before you can create paintings you are happy with. Take a step back. Ask yourself why you first thought about learning to paint. For most people, it boils down to having time for themselves and focusing on something they enjoy. Lots of people learn for pleasure. Maybe you've been inspired by a friend. Perhaps you haven't been creative since leaving school, but remember how much you liked to paint when you were younger. For me personally, I want to have fun while I paint. I want to enjoy the process, and more importantly, I want to relax. I know many of my students feel the same way. The key is to be kind to yourself. Remember, we all learn from mistakes, and if we didn't make mistakes, we'd never improve. Now you have watched my video, I hope your anxieties and questions have been answered. The next step is to purchase your colours and start painting. Remember, have fun, enjoy the process, and relax. Thank you for watching.